and welcome to our first monthly extra episode here at Another Day, Another Evil. I'm your host Melissa.
And I'm Georgina. We're planning on bringing you an extra episode every month that focuses on a disaster, survivor, or something weird and wacky, but not always strictly true crime.
This month, however, we're following on from our episode of Peter Sutcliffe, but as we promised, since there's so much to try and fit into our main episode, we're going to focus on some of his survivors. So just to note that there will be mentions of violence during this episode and some mentions of a medical nature, but listener discretion is always advised. Although Sutcliffe unfortunately managed to kill at least 13 people, he also had many survivors, and of course there are many more suspected crimes that could have been linked to him. We're going to focus today on his known survivors, their lives then, the impact of his attack on them, and their lives today, as much as we can. Just a reminder, Sutcliffe attacked most of his victims initially with a hammer, hitting them on the back of the head, so absolutely horrific attacks. So let's look into the lives of the lucky, in one sense, the ones who survived. So the first of Sutcliffe's known surviving victims is unnamed. So he says that after being taunted by a sex worker that he'd hired, he sought revenge and then attacked the unnamed victim, who wasn't the sex worker who taunted him, just to clarify, by hitting her on the back of the head with a stone that was inside a sock, and that happened in Bradford, West Yorkshire. The woman survived and Sutcliffe was identified, but unfortunately, and of course entirely understandably, no victim blaming here, the woman chose not to press charges, so nothing further came from it. This is often referred to in the documentation as the stone in the sock incident. So next survivor that we know, Anna Ragulskij, was born Anna Patricia Brosnan in Tralee in County Kerry, Ireland, to a Catholic farmer. She was one of 12 children with 8 sisters and 3 brothers. In 1948, aged just 15, she left home to move to Keighley in West Yorkshire, England, to live with her sister, who was already living there. She found a job in a local factory sorting playing cards, and it is there that she met Roman Ragulskij, a Ukrainian immigrant. The pair married when Anna was 21 on the 19th of February 1955. The pair had no children, but stayed married for 18 years until they divorced in 1973. After this, Anna's confidence took a little knock, as Roman was quickly remarried, whilst Anna ended up meeting a violent, abusive man named Geoffrey Hughes, who had recently been discharged from a psychiatric hospital with a warning to, quote, keep away from women for 5 years. So it was the 5th of July 1975, following an argument with Jeff, that Anna was attacked by Sutcliffe. After refusing a sexual proposition whilst walking in an alleyway, she felt an intense pain in her skull and the world went black. Sutcliffe was disturbed by a noise and Anna was found at 2:20 a.m. and rushed to Leeds General Infirmary, where, during a 12-hour surgery, shards of Anna's skull needed to be removed from her brain. At one point she was even given her last rites, but somehow, miraculously, she pulled through. Anna was unable to remember anything, but was convinced that the man who attacked her was local. Jeff was eliminated from the inquiries, and a neighbour described the events leading up to the attack, claiming that he had seen a man in his 20s or 30s, around 5'8", wearing a checked jacket around the time of the attack, but this led nowhere. Anna's life was undoubtedly altered following this horrific attack. She ended her relationship with Jeff and struggled to form any relationships with new men. She, understandably, struggled to leave the house, becoming panicked if anyone watched too closely behind her in the street. She said that sometimes she wished she had died that night and hated the association to Sutcliffe and the implication that she was a sex worker. She died aged 75 in 2008 after suffering from breast cancer and pneumonia. So following Jane McDonald's murder, the investigation into Anna Ragulskij's attack was reopened, And George Oldfield, the lead investigator, told reporters that Anna enjoyed, quote, the good life, which was a euphemism at the time for promiscuity. And this further traumatised Anna, and she has never publicly linked herself to Sutcliffe. Understandably, of course. And I think we touched on this in our main episode, given how misogynistic the attitudes were around the time and how deeply traumatising these associations were for victims, given the implication that this somehow made them less victim-worthy.
Yeah, I definitely don't think if I'd have gone through that, knowing how they were trapped at the time, that I'd have wanted to be linked to him either.
No.
She went through something awful, nearly died, and then got trapped like shit.
Yeah, which is horrible.
It's just so sad knowing that, you know, she died almost being ashamed of being alive. Like you say, at some point she said she wished she'd have died.
Yeah.
That must be an awful feeling to feel after you've survived something so traumatic.
Yeah. So, Olive Smelt was born in 1929 to a single mother, Elsie Tempest, and was raised by her mother and grandparents in Halifax, West Yorkshire. In 1948, she married Harry Smelt and they had 3 children together, 2 daughters and a son. At the time of her attack, Olive was 46 years old and was working as an office cleaner, whilst her husband worked in a local rehabilitation centre. Olive described herself as, quote, the life and soul of the party, with her husband agreeing that she was, quote, full of energy and enjoyed a night out. On the 15th of August 1975, she was attacked whilst walking home after meeting a few friends for a drink. Olive later remembered a bearded man that she had seen earlier saying something about the weather before everything went blank. She was rescued by a neighbour arriving home who took her into his house whilst another neighbour ran for her husband. She was then rushed to Halifax Infirmary, where she was then actually transferred to the Leeds General Infirmary due to the nature of her injuries. She had sustained 2 skull fractures and doctors had to discuss the best course of action to reduce pressure on Olive's brain. They could operate, which carried a greater risk, or they could leave it and hope that the swelling reduced itself, and that's what they actually finally decided to do. Thankfully, she woke a couple of days later. She was discharged, again, somewhat miraculously, after spending only 10 days in hospital. The attacker was described as being about aged 30, 5 feet 10 inches, slightly built, and had dark hair with some beard or growth on his face. The pathologist who investigated Olive's injuries had previously also assessed Anna's, and he wrote to the detectives asking to compare these injuries, but nothing further was ever mentioned. Later, during the investigation, Olive insisted that the man who had attacked her was not a Geordie and that he had a strong Yorkshire accent. But, as we discussed in our last episode, the police completely ignored this.
And of course, like, the whole recollection of something after something so traumatic happens, we must question that, because memory is a memory. It's not always accurate. It is not fact. So we do have to question some things, especially after something so traumatic.
Yeah.
But I also think that obviously they ignored woman after woman after woman,
yeah,
which obviously we talked about last week or so in the other episode.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to note that obviously, like, you can't always take victims' memory at face value. But obviously here, they blatantly ignored it. They didn't even consider it at all.
And I think it's interesting that it could have been so easy to persuade these victims that he had a Geordie accent because that's what they were focused on. There's so many instances in... I mean, the most obvious instances are in, like, false confessions where they lead suspects to convince themselves to, like, remember certain details and feed them information, and these victims could have easily been led by that, and Olive obviously refused to be led by that, and there's other victims that will come on to who also said the same thing. And obviously this description of the man being bearded and around 5 feet 10, around 30, this comes up again and again and again, like the accent thing. So I think it's an interesting thing to note that they could have easily been led, and these victims were
knew what they were
adamant.
talking about. They knew what happened and would not give that up. They wanted the person who did it to be found so badly that they wouldn't let themselves. I'm not saying that if they had let themselves, they didn't want them to be found, but yeah, they obviously knew in their heart of hearts that they were right.
Yeah. So Olive was obviously scarred by the attack. Physically, she made a good recovery. She did experience some mobility issues and she had pain in her head, of course. She said that, and again, this is completely understandable, that she was terrified to go outside. She'd often suffer from nightmares and wake up and unable to breathe, and she was screaming. And of course, this led her to sinking into a depression. She also noticed how there was a stigma to being one of Sutcliffe's victims. We've talked about this, but yeah, important to note. She said particularly after Chief Constable Ronald Gregory had called her a prostitute in his memoirs in 1986, and her daughter Julie Lowry, who was only 15 at the time of Olive's attack, said, quote, "She never got over that night. She did well to survive and had to learn to accept what happened mentally, but physically her mobility was never the same." And Olive died in 2011, aged 82, after suffering a series of strokes and contracting pneumonia. Tracy Brown is Sutcliffe's youngest known victim. She was born in 1961 with her twin sister Mandy. They lived with their parents on a farm near Silsden in West Yorkshire. On Wednesday the 27th of August 1975, Tracy and her sister were walking home after meeting friends. Tracy had got chatting whilst her sister carried on. So alone, Tracy ended up meeting a man who she described as having a beard, afro-style hair and black eyes. The pair got chatting and they walked together towards Tracy's home for about 30 minutes, during which she said she never felt uncomfortable in this man's presence. When they reached the turn into her home, Tracy turned to thank the man for walking with her, and that's when he hit her. She said that she was screaming and pleading with him not to hurt her, but he continued to hit her. And then a car passed and the man threw her over a fence, and somehow, disorientated and obviously had no clear vision, she managed to stagger to a farmhand's caravan on the property. So Tracy was rushed to Chapelton Hospital in Leeds, where neurosurgeons operated on her for 5 hours and they had to remove a slither of bone from her brain. When she recovered, she managed to give a detailed and accurate, might I add, as we keep saying, description of the man, including the gap between his teeth, and, again, noted his local accent. She helped the police to produce a photo fit, which you'll be able to find online, and we've got the links to this in our show notes. So I just want to show you this photo fit that was produced, Gina.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you want to describe what you're seeing to me in comparison to the picture of Sutcliffe. How accurate would you describe that as been a representation of him? Or tell me what there is right and tell me kind of what's not right.
Okay, so yeah, the photo fit definitely looks like Peter Sutcliffe. It is almost a spit and dab of him. So the eyes are definitely like heavy set. They've got the nose, they've got the kind of bit on the moustache where it like goes up to your lip. I don't know whether there's an actual like terminology for that bit. Not the moustache, sorry, on the beard.
It's like the goatee bit?
Yeah, like the goatee bit. It basically looks like him. You can't see the ears on the photo fit, whereas obviously he does have ears. And a lot of people are kind of identified through their nose and their ears, aren't they? Because that's something that it never changes on a person. The hairline is almost perfect. On the photo fit, there's definitely a slight discrepancy there with... And obviously you don't know whether this is how he had his hair styled at the time, but on the photo fit he's definitely got like a little bit of a dip into his forehead. So he's got like a bit more of a receding one, whereas actually looking at the photo of him that's up on the screen, it is very square around his head, which obviously that could just be how it's styled. But yeah, definitely Peter Sutcliffe.
Yeah. So, as we've already mentioned, she was ultimately ignored when it came to the full investigation. They kind of just didn't ever come back to this. So following the attack, Tracy returned to school where she actually endured bullying about the incident, which is bananas to me. How can you... Yeah.
It's awful.
Yeah, it's horrible. She had to have regular brain scans and she had to take drugs to prevent seizures. But thankfully, she never let this take over her. And she decided to take the attitude, which I do not think I could have the same attitude. But she took the attitude that she was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. And this terrible thing happened to her, but she had to just move on from it, which is...
There's a very strong attitude to have, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, that must be so difficult as a victim. Like, unfortunately, like, yes, all of these people were the wrong person at the wrong time. Like, he was so hell-bent on hurting women.
Yeah.
That if somebody else was there, it would have happened to them.
Yeah.
And luckily Tracy ran away, whereas if somebody else had been there, they might not have been as fortunate. So, yeah, she was at the wrong place at the wrong time, but that does not make it her fault.
Yeah.
At all. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that's a very strong standpoint to have.
Yeah.
And if that's what you've got to tell yourself to
Yeah.
get through it, then good on her. Good on her.
And to not feel pity as such for herself.
Yeah.
And obviously, if you do feel pity for yourself, you're perfectly entitled to do that. But to be so young and to have such a mature, I'd need to just get on with my life kind of attitude is amazing.
She's an inspiration, absolute inspiration.
She really is, and she's spoken out quite publicly in numerous articles and documentaries about her experiences and about the failures of the police, which, understandable. So, Marcella Claxton was born on the island of St Kitts in the Caribbean, but relocated to Leeds as a child with her mother, who was fleeing from her abusive father. Marcella struggled academically in Leeds, and by 1976 she was unemployed, pregnant, and had 2 children already in the foster care system. After attending a party on Saturday the 4th of May 1976, Marcella was walking home at 4 a.m. and a driver stopped to offer her a lift, which she gladly accepted. Obviously a big no-no in today's day and age, but perfectly normal back in the 70s. And at one point she got out of the car to go pee, and this is when the man attacked her. He apparently masturbated over her, which Sutcliffe has since vehemently denied, though this might actually be more to do with the racism involved, because the language he used was foul and racist and, yeah, disgusting. So that might have been a contributing factor as to why he's denied doing that.
Yeah.
But apparently he did, and he pushed a £5 note into her hand and told her not to tell the police, and then he drove away, which seems different to the other victims who he was disturbed attacking. I don't know if it tells us anything in particular about anything. I just think it's an interesting thing to know.
Seems different to his MO before.
Yeah, because Marcella then managed to stumble to a phone box and call for help, and then she says while she was waiting for help to come, she noticed the man return and he appeared to be looking for her, so she felt that he was coming to finish off the job. And she was rushed to Leeds General Infirmary, where she underwent extensive brain surgery and required 52 stitches. I've also seen conflicting reports about this, but apparently she was 4 months pregnant at the time and she miscarried that baby. But like I say, some sources have said that she was pregnant and some have just not mentioned that and just mentioned the brain surgery, so not 100% there. So she told the police that her attacker was a bearded white male with crinkly black hair who drove a white car with red upholstery. The police, who, aside from being misogynistic, were completely racist, and they suggested that actually she was mistaken and it was a black man who attacked her, which I don't know about you, but I would be able to tell whether somebody is white or black if I'm sat in a car with them.
Yes, definitely.
For a period of time.
Definitely.
So, yeah. And she helped to compose a photo for it. It's supposedly looked quite like the one of Tracy Brown, the one you've just described, Gina, that Tracy Brown helped to provide. But this picture was never released to the public. And the police didn't link her attack to the murders of Wilma and Emily, which had already occurred. And Marcella later said, quote, "If only they had listened to the description I gave, they might have caught him earlier and all those poor women would not have died." She spent 6 days in hospital, but of course life never returned to normal. She's plagued with headaches, dizziness, blackouts, suffered from depression, which she still actually says she suffers from today. Completely understandable.
Yeah.
Speaking in 2023, she said, quote, "Peter Sutcliffe ruined my life. I can never escape what he did to me. I suffer pain every day, exactly where he hit me." Maureen Long was born Maureen Waterhouse in 1934. I couldn't actually find much about her early life, but she met and married Ronald Long, and by 1966 the couple had 3 children, and then Maureen had begun to suffer from anxiety. The pair separated, but they remained on good terms. In 1974, Maureen met Ken Smith and the pair moved to Farsley, which is 6 miles from Leeds and 4 miles from Bradford. And she enjoyed dancing and spending a lot of time in Mecca, which was a nightclub in Bradford. On the evening of Saturday the 9th of July 1977, this is where she was headed, to the Mecca nightclub. So, to begin with, she met her ex-husband, Ronald, in the pub for a couple of drinks, and then she made her way to Mecca. She remembers visiting the club's cloakroom at 2 a.m. and heading out to find a taxi to take her to stay at her ex-husband's. Early the next morning, she was found bloodied, but thankfully alive, by 2 women who had heard her moaning. So after she was taken to Bradford Royal Infirmary, Professor Gee, who we mentioned last week, who was working on all the cases, who had studied the previous victims' wounds, looked over Maureen, stating that she was lucky to be alive. And she was then transferred to the Leeds General Infirmary for neurosurgery, and she was left with a metal implant in her skull. She remained in hospital for 9 weeks before spending a further 3 weeks in a convalescent home. So as with his other surviving victims, Maureen was scarred and was left unable to work. After George Oldfield made a statement describing her as a woman who, quote, liked the good life, the press concluded that she was just another promiscuous woman, and Maureen was left mortified that she was being termed as a sex worker. She said, quote, "Once I was at a table and nobody sat down with me because they assumed I was one meaning sex worker. I used to run into the toilet and cry. I felt ashamed." And following her attack, her daughter was taken into care whilst Maureen unfortunately had to deal with the aftermath of everything that comes with being attacked and then surviving and having to rebuild your life.
That's awful. Tell me one woman who doesn't like a good life.
Exactly.
Please.
And why can't she go out to
And
a
have
nightclub?
a drink and have fun. Oh.
Yeah, it's very sad. Marilyn Moore was born in Leeds. Again, I couldn't find much about her. At aged 15, she left home, got married, gave birth to 2 children, a son and a daughter, but the marriage didn't last. And by 1977, she was engaged in sex work in order to provide for her children. On Wednesday the 14th of December 1977, Marilyn was working the red light district in Leeds when Sutcliffe propositioned her. After driving her to a more remote area, Sutcliffe got out of the car, then attacked Marilyn. Speaking in a Channel 5 documentary, Left for Dead, Marilyn recalls, quote, "I'd just got my hand on the handle of the rear door when he hit me. I didn't know what was happening. I didn't really feel the blow, but I put my hands up over the back of my head for protection and he hit my thumb with the second blow. The third one really hurt and I began to go down. I could hear him screaming at me, 'You dirty prostitute,' and the next thing I knew, I was lying on the ground and everything seemed to be a haze." So thankfully, a passerby had interrupted the attack and Marilyn managed to stagger to a passing couple who called an ambulance. At the Leeds General Infirmary, Marilyn underwent surgery, receiving 56 stitches in her head, and again was looked at by Professor Gee, who confirmed her attacker was Sutcliffe. Obviously unknown to be Sutcliffe at this time, but it was linked to this other attacks. She was able to provide a detailed description of her attacker, much the same as previous survivors, and again produced a photo fit. So, Gina, Marilyn actually produced 2 photo fits, one in 1977 and then a second one in 1978. So I just want you to talk me through the 2 photo fits. If we start with the one that she produced first, how much similar, different does it look like Sutcliffe?
Yeah, so this one I would say maybe looks a little bit less like Peter Sutcliffe, only with the hair being a little bit more curlier and longer. The beard's still there, the moustache is still there, the eyes are still quite heavy set. But I would say that that one definitely looks a little bit less like Peter Sutcliffe than the one we saw from Tracy Brown.
Yeah, his hair looks a lot longer, more 70s vibe hair than Sutcliffe's actually does. I would agree with you there, yeah.
Yeah, I think his face looks a lot more narrow as well, but I don't know whether that's just because of how the hair is. It makes his face look quite narrow. But yeah, I definitely think it looks a little bit less like him.
Yeah, but the beard's definitely there. It's definitely got that. Yeah,
the beard's there, the moustache is there. It doesn't quite have that bit, the goatee bit that we were talking about on the last photo fit, but you know, it's a man with a beard.
Yeah. And then the second one?
The second one definitely looks a little bit more like him, I would say, maybe. Again, not quite as good as Tracy Brown's, but you know, we don't know who drew these are. I'm not saying that Marilyn Moore was inaccurate.
Yeah.
There are obviously errors that can be made on the drawer's part as well, but definitely more of a squarer face. The hair's definitely a little bit more like how Peter Sutcliffe's hair was at the time. He's got that kind of receding look again, whereas on the photos that we're looking at to compare, so I think it says it's compared to a wedding day photograph of Sutcliffe and then another one that was taken at the time similar to the attacks. It's definitely more square framing on his face, whereas that drawing does have a bit of a recede to it.
Yeah.
The eyes again are quite heavy set. I would say that the eyes are a little bit less like his than on the other 2 profiles.
Yeah.
Again, has the beard, has the moustache, the goatee again is missing. Again, I would say that second photo fit is a bit less like him as Tracy Brown's was, but it still has the similarities of what he looks like.
Yeah, and like I said, you can find all these, we'll link them in our show notes, but I think a lot of the key features of Sutcliffe are there, particularly the beard and the deep set eyes in all these photo fits that we're looking at.
Yeah.
So when Tracy Brown, the 14-year-old who'd been attacked, when she saw the photo fit, she immediately recognised it as the man who had attacked her. She filed a report with the police, but they just ignored her basically and nothing further was done. So back to Marilyn discharged herself from hospital around New Year and moved to High Wycombe in Buckinghamshire to stay with friends, and she struggled to settle in one place afterwards. And her hair, which had once been bright red, grew back brown, which is something that she felt kind of upset by. And of course, as with all Sutcliffe survivors, she was left traumatised and there was no support or counselling available to her.
I'd like to say that it's totally different today, but I'm not sure that it is.
No.
The support being provided, it's definitely made its strides. I'm not saying that people aren't providing support and support isn't there, because there are some amazing charities out there doing the work.
Yeah.
But I definitely don't think there's enough going on to support people who have had so much trauma happen.
No. So on the 2nd of March 1979, 22-year-old Anne Rooney was attacked in Leeds. She survived. She described her attacker as being in his 20s, 5'10" in height, broad build, dark curly hair and a drooping moustache. He was not originally linked to this attack, but he confessed to it in 1992. Sadly, I couldn't find anything further about Anne in terms of her early life, what was happening at the time and how she's moved on from that. I think the only reason she is in with the survivors is that he confessed to Anne's attack. I don't think she'd ever spoken out or anything.
Yeah.
So given that, we're going to have to move on. So, Upadhyaya and Davathi Bandara, apologies if I have pronounced that wrong, which I no doubt will have done, was born in Singapore, the youngest of 8 children, in around 1946. She won a scholarship for postgraduate studies from the World Health Organization and moved to Leeds, where, at the time of her attack, she'd just completed the course, earning her doctorate, and was preparing to return to Singapore. On Wednesday the 24th of September 1980, Upadhyaya had left a friend's house and was walking home when she heard footsteps approaching quickly from behind. As she moved to let the person past, she felt something strike her on the head, followed by a rope being pulled around her neck, causing her to fall unconscious. So somebody living nearby had heard the attack and scared Sutcliffe off. Whilst waiting for emergency services, Upadhyaya regained consciousness and was groaning. Following surgery at the Leeds General Infirmary, Upadhyaya described her attacker as having dark hair and a trimmed beard. Police didn't connect this to Sutcliffe's other attacks, given the fact he used a ligature and there was no stab wounds on her body. She was discharged from hospital a week later and flew back to Singapore in October of 1980. She refused to speak publicly about her attack, and she died at the age of 60 in 2006. On the 25th of October 1980, Mo Lee left her friends and decided to walk through the Leeds University campus to catch the bus. A man approached her speaking, and when she turned around and realised that she didn't actually know him, she had an overwhelming sense of fear and began to run. He managed to hit her in the back of her head with a hammer, and he attacked her with a screwdriver, but her life was saved by a passing couple who heard her screams. She ended up spending her 21st birthday in intensive care, and her injuries were so bad that her parents were unable to recognise her. After his arrest, so after Sutcliffe had been arrested, she saw his picture on the TV and knew immediately that he was the person who'd attacked her. She felt ashamed initially to be linked to Sutcliffe, given that he was known to attack sex workers, and didn't admit to being attacked by him for many, many years. After suffering from PTSD, she managed to overcome this. She returned to university to complete her art degree, and she said that harnessing her anger and turning it into something creative to become an artist and later a senior lecturer in art managed to help her overcome this. Sutcliffe has never confessed to Mo's attack, and police were unable to find enough evidence to link it to him, but Mo is convinced that it was Sutcliffe who attacked her, and there's many reports which do agree that she was one of his victims. And I think as well, I read the Byford report, I think they linked Mo's attack to that as well, but I might be wrong there. Teresa Sykes was born in Huddersfield and lived with her parents who ran a local pub. In 1980, 16-year-old Teresa had recently moved into a house with a boyfriend and they'd recently become parents. So it was bonfire night and Teresa was staying in with her boyfriend and baby, but the couple had run out of cigarettes and her boyfriend didn't want them to leave the house, so Teresa went out. After leaving the shop and heading home, she noticed a man in a telephone box. As she was walking past the park, she realised he was following her. She couldn't remember the attack, but her screaming had actually alerted her boyfriend, and he began chasing Sutcliffe, but unfortunately lost him. She was taken to Huddersfield Royal Infirmary before being transferred to Chapel Allerton Hospital for emergency brain surgery, where she then spent 5 weeks recovering. She described her attacker as having black hair and a beard, and she then underwent further surgery at the beginning of December and was of course left mentally scarred by the attack. Speaking later, she said that she had to relearn how to walk and she struggled with her speech after suffering the horrific injuries. She was very distrustful of men and she broke off her engagement with her boyfriend and moved back in with her parents, and she had to sleep with a knife under her pillow in order to feel safe. She said that his face will live with her forever, and police were quick to rule out Sutcliffe as Teresa's attacker, presumably because they didn't actually want to believe it and didn't want to whip up the media into a frenzy any more than what they actually were, rather than them actually discounting him. So, Olivia St. Elmo Rieves was born in Jamaica and dreamed of becoming a nurse or a singer. She moved to Birmingham in the UK in her teens with her family. At age 19, she gave birth to a daughter and moved to Sheffield. In 1977, she turned to sex work in order to provide for her daughter. On the 2nd of January 1981, she got into Sutcliffe's car when he offered her £10, which should be just under £40 today. They drove to an area common for sex workers to take clients and attempted to have sex before the police arrived. Sutcliffe pretended that Olivia was his girlfriend, but when Olivia gave them her real name, she was found to have previous convictions for soliciting, so they were both arrested. And this is obviously the point where Sutcliffe was taken into custody, came off as really red flaggy to the officer, and the rest is, as they say, history. Olivia was released at 3 a.m, and she had probably the luckiest of all escapes. So I don't know about you, Gina, but I can't even imagine how terrifying it would have been to have been a woman at that time. Obviously, we don't live all that far from the area, and our parents were young people in the times of those attacks. Obviously...
Yeah, they were newly married in the 80s.
Yeah, just after Sutcliffe was arrested.
Yeah.
But they would have been 18 and going out during the times of these attacks.
Yeah, it must be terrifying. I mean, I know what it's like to be a woman nowadays, and we don't necessarily have anything like that happening. I'm not saying that we are any more safe or anything like that, but I'm just saying, like, currently we don't have,
It's not a
serial killer targeting young women. Not even young women, all women.
Yeah. That we know of.
Yeah, that we know of. It must have been terrifying. Yeah. Really must have been. It might be something that we should ask Mum about.
Yeah. I know she's talked about it briefly to me. She said how... Well, Mum and Dad have both said how they remember going to the phone boxes and hearing the voice that obviously we discussed last week where it was the hoax. And Mum was saying how it was scary and there was this culture of fear around, I guess, the entirety of Yorkshire, really. Especially West Yorkshire, obviously they're Wakefield.
Yeah, definitely West Yorkshire, but Yorkshire in general. Like we say, he wasn't just operating in one area, he did go elsewhere, didn't he? But yeah, it must have been just terrifying. And I know obviously the media frenzy must have really made that worse, and I can understand in some instances, very, very loosely understand why the police didn't want to admit what was going on because of the media, because it really did bring fear to everybody. Yeah. And obviously that's not what they wanted. No. But yeah, it must have been terrifying at that time.
Yeah. So, Peter Sutcliffe is suspected to have committed many more crimes, and a search of his name will bring up thousands of documentaries, articles, podcasts, books, if you or our listeners want to find out more. The entire case, evidence that they had, details of the murders and attacks, the letters and tapes sent by Wayside Jack, and Sutcliffe's confessions are all also available online. We'll provide links to them in our show notes on our website. Obviously those photo fits that I was showing you, Gina, the links are on our websites. The impact of this case was far-reaching, with not only the victims and their families and friends left to rebuild their lives, but women everywhere. The mishandling of the police investigation and the massive fuck-ups led to the internal report, which basically did bugger all, nothing came of it. And then the Byford report, which admitted police failings, but wasn't actually released until 2006, because, get this, it might hurt officer morale and cause more distrust in the police.
No. Police caused distrust in the police.
Yeah.
their behaviour towards women caused distrust in the police.
Yeah.
And funnily enough, it is something I am doing currently.
Yes, and it might hurt officer morale. What about the morale of the public and the victims and everybody else who was failed by the police?
And the morale of the women who were told to stay inside so they didn't get attacked.
Yeah, all the ones who had their names linked to sex work unfairly and were therefore judged by the community, particularly the surviving victims who were judged by the community. What about their morale? Bonkers. 2006.
I have no other words.
No.
I don't have anything. I've got nothing left to give.
I'm going to end with a... Sadly, as we know, over half a century later, nothing has changed. Men are still murdering women and the victims are still being blamed. Hopefully, one day, something will change, but I think it's important to reflect on the truth, the fact that nothing has as of yet, and the world is still a scary place. However, victims and families suffer every day and our thoughts are with them in their entirety. And we hope that they can continue to rebuild their lives and make the best of a bad situation. All episodes are written and presented by Melissa and Georgina Scara.
Editing is by Vicky Hunter.
All of our sources can be found in our show notes or on our website.
Take care.
Stay safe out there.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.